This is a webinar as part of a national week of action and political education coordinated by the International Committee's Palestine Subcommittee. We thank the International Committee for all their hard work putting this together. I'm Samuel Iriani. I'm a member of the organizing committee of the anti-war working group here in New York City. And this is the ongoing Nakba in the context of empire. Just a few words about the webinar. We will be recording it and posting it to the YouTube, DSA's YouTube. We have a question and answer function that I encourage all of you to use. This is going to be a very wide ranging conversation, and there's no such thing as bad questions. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we'll try to get to as many as we can. I will introduce our wonderful panelists, and then I will give a brief grounding for what this panel will cover. So, give me one moment. When you are ready, please press next on the slide. So yeah, our panelists today include Corinna Mullin. She is an anti-imperialist academic, teaches political science and economics. She was a member of the steering committee for the International People's Tribunal on U.S. imperialism and organizes with CUNY for Palestine and Labor for Palestine. She serves on the steering committee of the PSC, CUNY's union. She serves on their international committee and is a member of the Delegate Assembly. Additionally, Corinna is a associate editor for Middle East Critique and serves on the Manuscript Review Collective for Science and Society. Next, Immanual Ness. His research and published scholarly work focuses on the political economy of comparative labor movements, workers' social organization, global south, political economy, socialism, contemporary imperialism. He is an editor of the Journal of Labor and Society, Brill. Ness is a senior research associate for the Department of Sociology, Center for Sociological Research and Practice at the University of Johannesburg. And finally, Matteo Capasso is an Italian professor at the Institute of Middle Eastern Studies at Northwestern University in Xi'an, People's Republic of China. He is currently editor-in-chief of the Middle East Critique, and a member of the International Studies Association and the Middle East Studies Association. He has published a book called Everyday Politics in the Libyan Jamahiriya, 2023, apologies for the typo, at Syracuse University Press. All of our panelists are, in my opinion, sort of paragons of scholarly courage and the ability for academia to push anti-imperialism forward and therefore the global class struggle. So yeah, I want to briefly ground us because this is going to be a wide-ranging discussion that'll cover a lot of ground. So to start, what is the Nakba? There are many possible answers. It's the Arabic word for catastrophe. The most common usage refers to the day that the so-called State of Israel was established in 1948, May 15th. But the Nakba is much more than just a single event. In English, you hear commonly when the Nakba happened. But in Arabic, you're more likely to hear لما بدأت النكبة or في بداية النكبة, which is when the Nakba began. Because the Nakba is a process. It's the foundation of Israel is part of an exterminationist project that is ongoing. It's also a structure and a structuring force in the region and globally. And it's also a condition that Palestinians for over 3 generations have lived under, whether it's in the Shitat, in the diaspora in 48, under apartheid, in the West Bank, experiencing daily humiliation and increasing tremendous violence at the hands of illegal settlers and the Zionist entity, and the people in Gaza who are withstanding an ongoing Holocaust. All of this is the Nakba. So to ground us on what I think is the sort of through line, is two potential answers to the question what the Nakba is. And I like to think of the moment that people refer to as the Nakba, the foundation of the state of Israel, as the moment the paramilitary death squads of the Haganah and spin-offs and the Irgun and the Lehi gang and the Stern gang became the IDF. It's a matter of historical record that the Nakba was carried out and began with just gratuitous, sadistic violence, right? It's a matter of record that there were at least 100 massacres. Those are the ones that were recorded. It's a matter of record that torture and sexual violence were used as weapons of war. It's a matter of record that water supplies were poisoned, that disease was used as a weapon of war. Human incineration, the deliberate targeting of children, indiscriminate shelling and airstrikes on civilian targets. They made spectacle of violence to try to break the Palestinian spirit. Pregnant women and children were often seen as useful in destroying morale as targets of violence. And I bring all that up not to just say that, like, you know, the last week in Gaza was, it's hard to even imagine, but one of the, if not some of the worst violence we've seen since the beginning of the Holocaust. And I bring all that up to say that what we're seeing now is the intensification of a process that has gone on unabated for over 77 years. And that is the Nakba. That's what the Nakba is. And then I'll finish on this. It's important to remember that the other question, potential answer to what the Nakba is the Nakba is Zionism. The exterminationist ideology of Zionism is hegemonic in the West. Okay? And what that means for something to be hegemonic is that almost every aspect of Western civil society, and I'm not talking about like public opinion, I'm talking about like civil society, right? Like our institutions, uphold Zionism. Our universities, legislative bodies, executive bodies, religious institutions, police, armies, intelligence, media, entertainment, every aspect, like the entire, and it's not just the United States, it's the Anglosphere, it's Western Europe, it's basically what we have decided is the free democratic Western civilization. They uphold Zionism, which means that these institutions have a devotion to the continuation of the Nakba. And so that's what this conversation is going to be about, I think. And I think that's what all the panelists are bringing, is the question of why, right? Like who benefits? Why is it this way? What does it mean for the people obviously for the people of Palestine, but also globally and regionally? What does it mean for workers around the world? And why is it that that if you are anyone who's interested in the liberation of humanity, the support of Palestinian resistance, the support of Palestinian return, the support for independent self-determination, state and self-determination for Palestinians is non-negotiable, right? This is not like something you can pick and choose. Like if you want liberation, you want the end of the Nakba and the defeat of Zionism. So that's what this conversation is about. That's what this panel will be grounded in. I trust my co-panelists will agree. So to start, I'd like to kick it over to Corinna, and please forgive me if I'm mispronounced. If it's Corinna, if it's not Corinna, I apologize. But if you were ready, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to all of the organizers of this important webinar. And also thank you for that really powerful grounding. And yeah, I mean, it's important to remember, that we are commemorating Nakba Day, even though it was a few days ago, but this is the framing for this event. And that catastrophe, Nakba is Arabic for catastrophe, and that of course began in 1948 with the violent or it didn't begin in 1948, began much earlier than 1948, but is often referred to in the context of the 750,000 Palestinians who were violently expelled from their homeland by Zionist militias in 1948. But as the Palestinian intellectual and martyr Basel al-Awraj reminds us, the Nakba is not just a date in history, it is a structure, as you mentioned, it is ongoing. The word Nakba summons, and this is a quote from a text that was recently translated by WAWAG, Writers Against the War on Gaza, and PYM, where he says the word Nakba summons in memory that momentous event that befell the Arabs in 1948. The Nakba, he says, is a lasting event that began before 1948 and whose effects and actions have never ended. The settler colonial replacement projects are not a momentary event, he says, but rather an ongoing structural process that seeks to replace one society with another. So today, as Gaza continues to be bombed, starved, and suffocated, as Palestinians are massacred in the thousands and refugees once again face a genocide, we see clearly that the Nakba is not in the past. It's unfolding now in real time as part of this broader Zionist imperialist project to dominate West Asia, crush all forms of resistance, and enforce a violent capitalist world order through genocide, displacement, and endless war. And Basel al-Awraj taught us that there are two kinds of memory of the Nakba, one of wounding and of loss, and one of heroism and resistance. And this is another quote from his text, the heroic acts carried out by the Arabs and their few supporters from among the free peoples of the world in defense of their land and nation. It is this memory of resistance that must animate our political understanding today, because to truly commemorate the Nakba is not just to mourn, it is to organize and to stand in solidarity with the resistance. To understand that Zionism is not an isolated atrocity, but a key instrument of global fascism and imperialism, and to confront it together with revolutionary clarity and uncompromising solidarity. This is what I'd like to talk about, is that relationship today between Zionism, imperialism, and fascism, not as isolated ideologies and material realities, but as interlocking systems rooted in the political economy of capitalist imperialist crisis. So this crisis that we are experiencing today is provoked by a deepening by the deepening or sharpening of a primary contradiction, the intensifying clash between a rising multipolar world order on the one hand and a declining, yet still and perhaps even more so aggressive US imperialism. This emergent multipolarity is marked by unprecedented economic and military South-South cooperation, including the burgeoning Iran-China-Russia partnership, as well as the growing rejection of Western financial domination. The imperialist sanctions regime, ever expanding in its reach, has laid bare the fragility of dollar hegemony, spurring the global majority to forge a new financial architecture grounded in de-risking strategies. From BRICS payment systems to local currency settlements and reserve diversification, this collective shift marks the undermining of dollar dominance while building alternative structures to resist imperialist coercion, accelerating the transition towards a multipolar world order no longer shackled to Western financial infrastructure. Meanwhile, beyond the coming upheaval this portends for the U.S. economy, U.S. military overextension is reaching a breaking point. It's crippled by production shortages that leave it unable to sustain the war in Ukraine, to contain Yemen's resistance, or to deter China's rise. No infusion of blood money, not even the proposed $1 trillion war economy boost promised by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, can resuscitate an empire in decline. So in this context, we must understand the Zionist settler colonial project as a key facet of imperialism's global strategy to rescue, to salvage and stabilize core imperialist capital accumulation, polarized accumulation on a world scale. It operates at the intersection of capitalist exploitation and racialized colonial violence. The settler colonial state of Israel, as the most violent expression of Zionism, serves as both a military and ideological tool of Western imperialism, ensuring control over key resources, suppressing national liberation movements, and maintaining capitalist dominance through both military violence and economic manipulation designed to stabilize polarized accumulation on a world scale. So let us understand Zionism within this framework. Zionism, a form of white supremacy rooted in 19th century European colonial projects, features prominently in the ideological infrastructure normalizing capitalist racism, which Charisse Burden-Stelly describes as capitalist racism and imperialism today. As Alde and Saleh have argued, Zionism began, and this is a quote from an article they wrote, Zionism began and developed as a reactionary political ideology, one that aligned itself with capitalist, imperialist, anti-Semitic, right-wing, and fascist forces. Although its global iterations have changed over time according to the needs of imperialist core capital accumulation, Zionism has consistently been used to justify the genocidal violence required to establish, maintain, and expand Israeli settler colonialism. A 1975 Organization of African Unity resolution describes Zionism as a form of racist colonialism, sharing a common imperialist origin with the racist regimes in Zimbabwe and South Africa and other colonies. Today, in addition to providing material support for imperialist interventions across the globe, Zionism furnishes the ideological cover for fascist repression globally. It legitimizes this repression as a mechanism for stabilizing capitalist core accumulation by invoking claims to fighting anti-Semitism, authoritarianism, and terrorism. Fascism, Zionism, and U.S. imperialism are deeply interconnected forces that together form a global counter-revolutionary project, one aimed at maintaining capitalist hegemony through racialized violence, dispossession, and suppression of resistance. So from a Marxist perspective, fascism is not a deviation from capitalism, but an intrinsic part of its functioning, particularly during times of crisis. This idea is explored by Gabriel Rockhill, who applies a historical materialist and dialectical approach to fascism, demonstrating that fascism adapts to different conjunctures based on the needs of capital during periods of crisis. Rockhill argues that fascism is deployed as a form of governance that intensifies state violence, protects capitalist interests, and ensures the perpetuation of exploitation. While liberal governance functions as a more conciliatory, what he calls good cop, to maintain capitalist control in times of stability, fascism becomes the quote-unquote bad cop, which uses overt repression to suppress dissent, particularly targeting racialized, colonized, and marginalized populations. Historically, the collaboration between fascism and capital has been strikingly evident. As Rockhill documents, corporate elites in the US have long supported fascist regimes such as Mussolini's and Hitler's through industrial investments and loans. Powerful figures from the corporate world, including from Ford, JP Morgan, and Standard Oil, directly funded and supported fascist regimes in Europe to stabilize capitalist accumulation. This collaboration between big capital and fascist regimes was not an anomaly, but a key part of the capitalist system strategy for surviving periods of crisis. The relationship between fascism and colonialism is also crucial to understanding the global scope of these oppressive systems. Of course, Aimé Césaire, in his Discourse on Colonialism, famously critiqued the Western obsession with Nazi violence as a form of exceptional barbarism. Césaire connects the rise of fascism in Europe to the long history of colonial violence perpetrated by European powers in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. He argues that the techniques of oppression employed by fascist regimes were not new, but of course were borrowed from the colonial practices used against indigenous peoples across the African continent, the Americas and Asia, and other colonized populations. Césaire's analysis challenged the idea that fascism was a uniquely European or a phenomena that uniquely occurred in Europe, showing that its genocidal tactics were built upon centuries of colonial exploitation. So in this sense, the rise of fascism cannot be understood without addressing its colonial roots and the ongoing colonial violence that feeds it. Fascism's systemic nature within the US is also a critical aspect of understanding its global influence. Nina Farnia, in her analysis of American fascism, argues that fascism is an endogenous project, one that is deeply rooted in the unique conditions of the US. Farnia points out that the US has long been a fascist state, as others like George Jackson have argued, in terms of its treatment of indigenous populations, the descendants of enslaved Black people, and other marginalized groups. The US has sustained its own form of fascism through broken treaties with indigenous nations, racist laws, and political economy, and policies that have continually undermined sovereignty and facilitated the exploitation and early death of oppressed and marginalized populations. As Farnia writes, the state's violence is systemic and it's fundamentally linked to a history of settler colonialism, genocide, and exploitation. So the intersection of Zionism and U.S. imperialism and fascism and maintaining capitalist and colonial domination is also central to understanding the global revolutionary project. Zionism as a settler colonial project shares many characteristics with the imperialist, with other practices of imperialist led or of U.S. imperialism rather. Zionism is rooted in a colonial framework that seeks to replace indigenous Palestinian population, as I was saying earlier, backed by imperialist powers, Western powers, earlier the UK and now the US. And other Western allied states. The genocidal violence of Zionism echoes the tactics of U.S. imperialism against, of course, the indigenous populations here in the U.S. as well. So this deep connection between Zionism, fascism, settler colonialism, imperialism underscores the urgency of understanding these systems as part of a broader global struggle for liberation. George Jackson, or to repress rather, global struggles for liberation. As George Jackson, the revolutionary, a martyr and revolutionary figure of the Black Panther Party, articulated this connection in his writing, stressing that fascism is not a distant threat, but already part of the U.S. system of governance. And he warned that the violence and repression faced by U.S. people by oppressed peoples under U.S. imperialism was also a form of fascism, international fascism. And his revolutionary thought, grounded in Marxist-Leninist theory, connected the dots between domestic struggle against capitalist oppression, racial capitalism, and settler colonialism and state violence to the broader struggle for national liberation. This global context is crucial in understanding the role of Zionism for supporting the imperialist project and the need for international solidarity in resisting fascism, imperialism in all its forms. Unlike much contemporary analysis of fascism, insurgent thinkers from this earlier revolutionary era, like George Jackson, consistently emphasized the connections between its domestic and global causes and manifestations. In Blood in My Eye, Jackson described fascism as a higher form of capitalism, emerging to protect the dominance of Western monopoly capital during periods of imperialist crisis by suppressing class struggle and revolutionary consciousness. Jackson's concept of the international fascist counter-revolution captured how core capitalist states responded to the successes of socialist and anti-imperialist national liberation struggle in the mid-20th century. Today, a striking parallel exists. The primary contradiction lies between a capitalist imperialist core in crisis and a global majority striving to complete the unfinished project of national liberation. As Jackson wrote, the US embodies the prototype of the international fascist counter-revolution, participating in conflicts and interventions that maintain imperialist control and suppress national liberation struggle. Zionism, as an expression of international fascism, plays a crucial, a central role in maintaining this global system of oppression and exploitation. The Zionist settler colonial state functions as an appendage of US imperialism, helping to control a geostrategic vital region and facilitating the exploitation of land, resources, and labor. This role becomes more critical in the context of global capitalist imperialist crisis, where super exploitation of labor in the global South accelerates, particularly through militarism and war. Zionism thus provides the material means and ideological cover for the escalating violence, which is essential for sustaining this polarized accumulation on a global scale. Dani Nambuderi, another a Marxist-Leninist Pan-Africanist, also argued that fascism is a reactionary response to capitalist crisis, particularly to the falling rate of profit. He emphasized that fascism assists monopoly capitalism by crushing democratic rights to protect the bourgeoisie from the threat of socialist revolution. Nambuderi also recognized the global nature of fascism, linking it to imperialist violence, functioning to protect imperialist accumulation at times of crisis. So fascism within the imperialist core, he also said, escalates. It also escalates in times of crisis, particularly against racialized working class communities. And that's, of course, to uphold capitalist racism. This intensification, the intensification of the carceral state, seeks to pacify potential insurgent forces, including immigrant, Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized groups. While the crisis of imperialism may prompt tactical retreats in some regions, it simultaneously leads to heightened intervention elsewhere. Prabhat Patnaik critiques the self-defeating nature of U.S. imperialist strategies. Well, what he describes, he thinks this is essentially, going to backfire Trump's policies, such as, which seeks to salvage Western dominance through coercion and militarism, but essentially will only, and he's talking here specifically about the tariff war, where he says essentially they're just going to reinforce the global capitalist crisis. So within this framework of imperialist violence, I just want to come back to the domestic context for 1 second before I conclude. Counterinsurgent lawfare has become a defining tool of repression, particularly targeting anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and anti-colonial movements. Nina Farnia, again, get back to her article, examines the consolidation of the modern national security state in the post-World War II era, highlighting how the U.S. created a unified apparatus to combat communism, influence the decolonizing world, or repress the decolonizing world and suppress domestic liberation. And we see, the government's use of increased use of lawfare today, against organizations, this McCarthyite witch hunt. We saw it a little bit earlier on, even, of course, and to say that there is continuity between Biden and Trump against the African People's Socialist Party, also the attacks on Sami Doon, all of this reflecting a broader strategy of criminalizing internationalist solidarity and national liberation struggle. And the tactic echoes, of course, the McCarthyite era witch hunts where dissent was labeled as a threat to national security. A focal point of this repression is the student movement in solidarity with Palestinian liberation, especially, the growing intifada, student intifada in the US. Following the Al-Aqsa flood, the fascist counterinsurgency focused its sights on the student intifada, most visibly during the crackdown on the Gaza solidarity encampments last spring. But we see it, again now with increased, with the resurgence and the liberated zones that are being built across our campuses. These deoccupations were seen as particularly dangerous during a moment of capitalist imperialist crisis. By drawing connections in terms of the investments, contracts, and institutional ties between their universities and the settler colonial genocide in Palestine, the more radical iterations of the encampments made clear the function of the academy in facilitating capital accumulation. The state has been particularly alarmed by the clear-sightedness, analytical lucidity, and ideological clarity of the student movement, which links the everyday fascism of the US police and carceral state designed to uphold white supremacy and settler colonialism and manage class relations with the targeted fascism used in counterinsurgency efforts to undermine liberation struggles on Turtle Island and expressions of solidarity with anti-imperialist movements, states, and national liberation struggles globally. So I know I'm running out of time, so I wanted to go into the movement a little bit and the repression, but we know, we can come back to this, of course, and I'm sure others will cover it as well, just to say, that there's, a combination of sort of private Zionist institutions like Betar and Canary Mission working together with the state, hand in glove. And we also have the various executive orders, of course, the visa revocations, the abduction, detention, threatened deportation of comrades. All of this is part of the fascist targeting of the student intifada, which is part of the global cradle, really, for the Palestinian resistance. And there are new projects emerging like every day. It's so tough to keep up. This Project Esther, launched by the Heritage Foundation, which is essentially trying to equate all expressions of solidarity with Palestine with terrorism. These are it's a really worrying development, and these renewed McCarthyite tactics have merged with the broader Cold War agenda as well against China, when there's been a racist targeting of Chinese students and academics. So I just want to end by saying that, this resurgent fascism, accelerated fascism in the US and globally, as it manifests as imperialist war and hybrid war in its various forms, whether it's the regime change in Syria or, destabilization in other parts of West Asia, Africa, the Americas, especially I wanted to bring up the example of Venezuela, where the Zionist entity was also responsible for attempting a coup against the Maduro government. All of this is as terrifying as it is really an example of it's an expression of the decline of US empire that is irreversible. And as one of the academics who's been targeted by the resurgent fascist, McCarthyite attacks on our universities, Halia Doutabhi, poignantly argued, the fascist repression, she said, is carried out to sustain the illusion of domestic stability, as well as the US and Zionist impunity. But nothing, she said, will stop the demise of the American empire. Despite the repression, the campus movement continues. The resistance, of course, in Gaza continues. It continues in Yemen. It continues, in places like Cuba and Venezuela. The rise of a global multipolar world order is inevitable. And here in the US, despite the repression, the campus movement continues. And we've had new encampments, new liberated zones, and now new organizing around sanctuary and popular universities. So I want to end this talk on a positive note. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Corinna. That was fantastic. That was something I always think about, which is, the whole world lives in America, essentially. or under America, and yeah, George Jackson was really prophetic in understanding that it's just because we're protected from some of the worst of the American Empire, doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case for everyone. Um, I am happy to introduce Immanuel Ness. If you are ready, we'd love to hear from hear your section next, which I understand is
Yes, I'm ready.
okay.
Oh, I have to turn on my video. Sorry.
Yeah, great
There
to
we
see you.
Yes, my apologies for being late because this is so important. I think it's crucial that I'm here to remark on a history that is crucial to understand in the sense that labor plays a tremendous role in the Nakba and now again with the genocide that's taking place in amongst Palestinians in the Gaza, and that it has been actually one of the key players in funding the expropriation of land, the expulsion of Palestinians for at least 100 years. So I'm just going to give you a number of points, and I think I have 10 minutes or so. What many of you might be surprised by is that the United Auto Workers, this esteemed union that is supposed to be radical, began purchasing bonds, Israeli bonds, in the 1920s and continued and expanded the purchase of Israeli labor Zionist bonds into the 1940s, and till this day, it maintains a sizable share of bonds. Okay, so just kind of to precede everything I want to say is that one of the main points I'm trying to convey here is that there is a tremendous significance to boycott, divest, sanction, and that this is not only something that is relevant today or for the last 30 years, is highly relevant over the entire history of the Zionist project and the expulsion of Palestinians from their land. We have this going back from the 1920s and 40s, where you had this labor Zionism that was taking place within Palestine, even before the foundation of the Zionist entity. It wasn't only functioning amongst Jewish trade unions, but a whole host of trade unions. They were engaged in developing exclusive farms, housing developments, banks, hospitals, clinics, and transportation networks. And the Histadrut, I just want to say, is the labor federation. I think it's a fake federation. They hardly have any members, even though they may claim to. They do this just for window dressing, so to speak. Most Zionists are not really members of the union. They don't pay dues or anything like that. It's a very flimsy union. And from the very beginning, it excluded Palestinians. So we can see that the racist project began from its origins as one that was exclusionary. And so the Zionist Histadrut leaders were actively pursuing the financial support of American unions to carry out their work because it prioritized class collaboration and nation building over class conflict and revolution. Labor Zionism appealed to the anti-racial business unionists in the United States. So you can see that there is a conjuncture between the kind of unionism that the United States had, a reactionary business unionism, and the kind of Zionist unionism where there would be a linkage between the two because they both believed in, capitalism, monopoly capitalism for that matter. And there was a tremendous amount of interplay amongst the unions. So we're not just talking about the UAW, we're talking about many other unions, and I think that's crucial to recognize. At the same time, there were even progressive labor unions that were impressed by the Zionist trade union because it put certain socialistic ideas into practice, so to speak. Socialistic, whatever that means for the Zionists only and the Jewish population only. So it was a highly racist one and an exclusionary one, which is, I think, crucial to remember and something that we need to understand. So throughout the history of the Zionist project, there has been a number of unions. I can mention a number of them that were involved in it. They include the American Federation of Teachers beginning in the 1960s and 70s, and AFSCME. Also, Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, was a Zionist proponent and completely supported the Zionist project even into the 90s and 2000s. So when we think of the anti-apartheid activism against the Zionist entity in the 1980s, that there is a degree to which, of course, it converged with the South African the South African anti-apartheid movement, and there was a degree to which many believe that as South Africa would decolonize, so to speak, so would the Zionist entity. And that came to a culmination with the Oslo Accords, which were a huge disaster, as we all know. So at the same time, the Zionists occupied the entire lands, including the post-67 territories, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, demanding an end to any kind of possibility of a Palestinian state. At the same time, there were activist Palestinians who were doing the same, seeking to gain a degree of freedom from the degree of indignities on a daily basis of military rule by the Zionists, deprivations that came with it. And of course, that culminated in 1987 with the first Intifada in December 1987, as I recall. So, and it continued over the next several years. So in this context, it became increasingly common for activists and commentators around the world to draw parallels between the two struggles, the Zionist struggle against Zionist and the struggle against South Africa. But one became stillborn, and the other actually isn't all that great either. But I think at this point, we really have to say that if we take a look at the long arc of history, that South Africa did decolonize to a certain degree, even though it's not economic equality. There was a significant degree of change after 1994. So a few months before the start of the Intifada, a group of around 10 progressive trade unionists in the Bay Area of California, some of whom I actually still know, launched a committee, probably one of the first, the Labor Committee on the Middle East, to educate U.S. union members about the injustices endured by Palestinians. Again, the boycott, divest, sanction was not there yet, but as its first public action, this organization picketed a San Francisco fundraiser for the Histadrut, the Zionist Trade Union Federation, to protest how its largest corporate subsidiary, Core Industries, operated a joint venture with the state-owned South African steel corporation called Iskor Steel. Among the attendees at the fundraiser dinner were members of the California State Legislature and top officials of the California Federation of Labor and the San Francisco Labor Council, which has subsequently been destroyed by the AFL-CIO. They basically stopped it from existence. We can get into that. As a nominally Israeli company, the Histadrut controlled many of the South African firms and so forth, and contributed actually to a great degree to the apartheid in South Africa as well through funding many of its developments. Of all people, some of you may know, Steve Zeltser was the founder of this group, the LCOME, and this connection he found to be logical. While we were, quote unquote, fighting for the AFL-CIO and U.S. unions to support the anti-apartheid struggle, this group said, how can we ignore the fact that the Zionist entity is actually supporting the apartheid regime as well, economically and materially, militarily, it should be said, I'm sorry. So we have this long history between the two unions, and in the United States, there is this degree to which the unions have not, generally speaking, changed too much, although especially on the national level. So I just want to get to this point of my paper. Sorry. So there are actually a number of unions in this country today that are interested in ending the Zionist apartheid and are, obviously engaged in a number of activities. So we should probably, I'm just going to fast forward it because I don't know how much time I have. Since late 2023, a wave of Palestinian solidarity activism has swept the United States and much of the world in responses to the genocide in the Gaza Strip of Palestinians, which scores of scholars, legal experts, and human rights organizations, as well as the International Court of Justice, as we all know, the International Criminal Court, have concluded is rife with war crimes, crimes against humanity, and absolutely genocide. Among those participating in the Palestine Solidarity Movement in the United States, were basically the rank and file. So within the UAW, while the United Auto Workers continue to support the Zionist entity, the rank and file members to some degree actually had opposed this. And even in our own union, saying this amongst us, the American Federation of Teachers or the National Education Association, there has been a number of rank and file activities against the Zionist entity. I mean, I can give you one example from the UAW. The graduate students in California had basically called for a boycott, sanction, and divest. This is something that was done on a local level. On the national level, the UAW continues to hold its position. However, the other unions that I wanted to talk about, that where there was a degree of concern amongst workers, have been the Service Employees International Union. And actually, one of my favorite unions is the American Postal Workers Union. And actually, I support that union as they're now facing the destruction under Trump, who wants to nationalize the Postal Service. So their leader actually wrote a very important article in The Nation about 15 months ago. And that article basically said that there is a huge problem amongst American trade unionists, and especially its trade union leaders, who have a very symbiotic connection to the Zionist entity, and that this comes to an end. This must come to an end. And so his name is Mark Dimenstein, by the way. And so he was actually at the forefront of the opposition to Biden in late 23 and called for, basically, they weren't calling for a boycott, sanctions, divest program. They weren't calling for almost anything. What they were calling for was a ceasefire, which did not come to fruition. And actually, it took a very long time for the AFL-CIO to support a ceasefire, grudgingly and basically, in some respects, behind the scenes, so that it wouldn't be something that would be in the forefront of the U.S. National Federation. I just want to say that the AFL-CIO is a crumbling federation. It represents the worst of trade unionism in the world. Only 5% of the union members of the American workforce in the private sector are union members, and they are engaged in activities throughout the world, imperialist activities in support of overthrowing governments and in support of the Zionist entity, amongst other cruel governments that are engaged in extermination. In this context, I think that would probably be the only one. So the growing solidarity with Palestine and the U.S. labor movement is largely something that takes place on the rank and file level and amongst young workers. The most pro-union age group are those adults under 30. Many of you may know that. And many of them may have a positive view of unions. So we have a disjuncture between the union leadership and its rank and file membership. But, we are struggling with a very significant problem because the unions aren't listening to them, and that there are a tremendous amount of penalties that uh, Professor Mullin was just talking about that we face from these various groups. So these groups have been organizing to get their unions to dump any Israeli bonds they may hold, such as the 150,000 in bonds held by the American Federation of Teachers until recently. It's very important development, or the more than 400,000 in bonds currently continues to be held by the United Auto Workers, and to encourage their pension funds to divest from companies that profit off of Israel's occupation and genocidal war machine, including Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon, and Caterpillar. Many of you are familiar with that. For example, at the National Convention of the American Federation of Teachers in July 24, the unions local in Berkeley, California, and members of the FT for Palestine caucus attempted to put forward 3 different Israeli divestment resolutions. Similarly, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees did the same thing in August 24 on a local level, but the national level, there was a huge amount of pushback, and that's something that we should recognize, so that at both conventions, these measures were either overruled. I don't know if anybody's been to a union convention. It's highly dictatorial as far as I'm concerned, and I think that's the nature of the United States, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. But at both conventions, these leaders had measures, and I think many of us know this from our own unions, that basically stop any kind of initiative for divestment. So these measures were either overruled in committee or rejected on the convention floor at the urging of national officers, such as Randy Weingarten and actually Sean Fain as well. So meanwhile, the UAW's, Sean Fain is the head of the president of the UAW. Meanwhile, the UAW's executive board reportedly voted down a divestment resolution in spring 24, just a year ago. It would cost the UAW $500,000 to move its investments, they said, out of a fund that includes around 400,000 to 700,000 worth of Israeli bonds. A few months later, however, Unite All Workers for Democracy, the Reform Caucus in the United Auto Workers, whose members hold a majority of the seats in the union executive board, formally endorsed pro-BDS measures put forward by the rank and file group UAW Labor for Palestine. So we are seeing a movement, which I think is something that we should be sanguine about, but we should not stop at any moment, even though we have setbacks on a regular basis. And once again, I think many of us know this. The people I'm speaking with know about labor and the way in which labor leaders manipulate conventions, manipulate delegate assemblies, and so forth and so on. I see that in my own union all the time when we try to put forward resolutions out of our international committee. So while the ongoing BDS efforts are often treated as controversial or divisive by union officials, which always happens, why is the Palestinian question so different from the South African question, which is something that we really have to raise? Because there was a higher level of support for the BDS against South Africa. And we see this in the entire labor movement. So the anti-Palestinian disposition can best be explained by considering labor officialdom's long-time material and political support for the Zionist entity, aka State of Israel, a relationship the likes which never existed in any other country, and even the South African apartheid state. So I'm going to close there. I think I went a bit over time, so forgive me, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was illuminating, but also I mean, it's something that we in DSA have been trying to find the cracks in the sort of the hegemony of Zionism in especially labor bureaucracy, like sort of leadership in labor, and the kind of progress that we've been seeing and the movement we've been seeing is actually like kind of, I don't know how long people have been in the Palestine solidarity movement. You get these moments where it's like things feel not enough, like just like completely insufficient for the moment, but they also, when they're happening, it's like, oh, if I couldn't have imagined this happening 10 years ago. And
I mean, I was in the
find,
movement for over 45 years, since the very beginning under Reagan.
yeah,
I know the chance, just to give you a sense.
right. Yeah. So I appreciated you saying that we should be happy about it, but we should not for 1 second stop or slow down or think or counter be too happy about it. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Matteo.
Yes. I mean,
That's you.
thank you so much. It was fascinating to listen to you both. I mean, especially I had no idea the amount of collaboration that the labor unions have done with the Zionist project. It would be interesting to see this, how much it happened across Europe as well, which is something I'm not aware. In any case, we're talking about the Nakba, and when we talk about the Nakba, we're talking about 1948. And when we're talking about, of course, we're talking about an historical period that is very important to understand. And this is what I want to do in this 10 minutes, 10, 12 minutes. I'd like to somehow historicize the rise of what we tend to call, I mean, theoretically, American imperialism. But if we really want to bring it down to an easier metaphor, we can think of this giant protection racket system that the West has imposed on the rest of the world, and where, you know, every once in a while they either take bribes, as it happened recently when Trump arrived in Saudi Arabia, or they just bomb you and they kill you directly. They destroy everything. And in the process, you have these enforcers that they allow you to do this in different parts of the regions. And this is what Zionism is. This is what I'm going to be trying to show you. That Zionism is an enforcer of this giant protection racket system that the US has imposed on the Middle East, on the region. So it's basically a mafia system, literally. And Zionism is at the core of it. Now, before I start, I have to break down something to our audience because I think it's very important for me to say this. The West does not live under any form, any country in the West does not live under any form of democracy. As Manu was talking about, this is it's a bourgeois state. It's a dictatorship of the bourgeois, of the market. The system responds only to the stock exchange, not to what the people want. And why am I saying this? Because we need to understand how it reproduces itself historically and throughout, through the formation and the accumulation of capital. Now, 1948 is the date where we start, because in 1948 we are in the aftermath of World War II. And this is very important for us to understand. Why? Because it was precisely at this point in time that the American project, which of course it's in continuity with three centuries, 4 centuries of European and Western wars and genocides across the Americas, Congo, Africa, and Asia, and so on and so forth. But it is in the aftermath of World War II where this project led by the US starts consolidating across the world. And in order to consolidate, this project needed to integrate, needed to control different parts of the world by propping up certain political projects, by supporting a certain type of reactionary, obscurantist ideologies. And religion played a very important part in this project, you know. As we will see now, as we talk about Zionism, as we talk about the reactionary Gulf states, but also as we talk about what happened in Europe, you know, because we also see the rise, the necessity for this project, American project to consolidate, to revive Nazism and all these very, very obscurantist forces that up to nowadays have become somehow the forces of democracy. But when we look at their history, we are just looking at what? We are looking at literally Nazi forces, religious forces propped up by the United States and Europe, everywhere in the world, that eventually come to power and they are defined as democratic. But this can only be understood not by referring to democracy, but only when we understand the world as a system of, again, as a mafia system, as a giant protection racket system, with at the top the US government and the US ruling classes. Now, let's zoom a little bit into the Arab region and understand what happened in the aftermath of World War II. The Arab region had a central role for this project, for this mafia system that was put into place because of its oil wealth. I mean, of course, it changed throughout time, but when we start looking at it specifically in the era of decolonization during those times, we see that oil played a key role because political access and control of oil flows and sales guaranteed the supremacy of the dollarized financial system, among many other things. Now, in this project, the role of Zionism, as I said, and reactionism, these obscurantist religious forces, and Zionism is one of them. Let's not forget that. It's a Jewish reactionism. It's not ISIS, but it's, if you want a metaphor, it's basically the same thing, but with Jewish characteristics. And so what we're seeing during this period is the support and the consolidation of two main actors. One is the Zionist entity, the Zionist project. The other one is the Gulf monarchies. Now, why this is important? It is important for us to understand how those were propped up, how those were backed up by the project of imperialism, because here we see the centrality of these two forces to the American project. So the Zionist entity is effectively a US military outpost, we can say, if we want to have a metaphor that incarnates, a way that to define something as a thing. But on an abstract level, it's pure destruction. That's what it is. It enforces destruction for the US and for the West. Now, the question would be, as all of you have mentioned, is why is the US government so invested in providing so much money, so 160 billion in aid from this is a US congressional papers putting the figures down, provided to the Zionist entity between 1943 and 2023, which, if we're looking at the inflation adjusted, it reaches 260 billion. And Obama was the so-called most progressive president of the US, provided Israel with 38 billion in military assistance, which again shows the trajectory of so-called liberal policies and how they have cumulatively brought up to Trump and the current administration that the US has. Why would the US provide all this money to the Zionist entity while at the same time people cannot afford healthcare in America? well, you know, there are no jobs for the American people, that they're struggling. When the situation, the mental health of people running around, the poverty, people sitting in the streets, and so on and so forth. Yet, all this money, all this counterinsurgency, all this locking up of people just because they go out and they support Palestine. Or actually, they don't just support Palestine, they oppose the Zionist entity. Why? I mean, if this project is far away, you know, one of the most important thing is that precisely how Zionism secures the capitalist the American, you know, the social reproduction of American imperialism, not just in the region, but worldwide. Now, as long as there were benefits for the American people in this front, it was okay to support this project. And I know Manny has been talking about this, and Corinna as well. You know, we need to understand the history of how the labor aristocracy saw the fact that labor in the West has always benefited from imperialist policies. And this is where, you know, it is important for us to understand why socialism, even in the core, requires to understand the struggle of national liberation. Because otherwise, socialism, the contradiction of capital and labor in the West can become an easy, can also become a terrain for the reproduction of imperialism. This is where we need to understand national liberation. And this is why we have Palestine now. And this is why the historical moment is so important for us, because there is a decline, there is a crisis of American imperialism. And I know you are feeling it as people in the US. I know you're feeling it, because it's hard to find jobs again. Because, you know, remember the story of that American Italian Mangione, I don't remember his name now, that shot one of the American health provider. Why? I mean, this is happening because there is no more, people are finding it difficult to explain, to find answers to all these interconnected problems. But the fight against not just the national liberation of Palestine, but the dismantlement of the undermining of the Zionist entity is crucial. Not just because, you know, they're sending money there, they're not giving it to us. No, because it's crucial to understand that what is happening in Palestine, it's going to come home once, sooner or later. It will come. It will hunt us back. It will come and start killing people everywhere. Because this is the history of the West. The West is based on genocide, on onslaught. And it has no problem, the ruling classes have no problem to prop up Nazis. Look at Ukraine. Look at the history that we had in Italy, where, you know, they transformed us with these beautiful movies about the mafia in a country with, you know, where there was something to be proud of having the mafia running the show. Or, you know, while destroying completely one of the largest party, one of the biggest party outside of the Soviet Union in the aftermath of World War II. And the same has happened in the region here. So if you had Israel, the Zionist entity, as a settler colonial formation that incubates this mode of consciousness, promoting Western values, securing US hegemony, at the same time, in order to de-develop the Arab region, so to bomb it, to destroy it, and so on and so forth, what did you need? You need these obscurantist, Islamist forces that now are running the show in the region. What am I talking about? I'm talking about al-Shara, al-Julani in Syria. I'm talking about the tribes of al-Saud. I'm talking about the UAE. I'm talking about Qatar. I'm talking about this, which of course they have their inside contradictions, but this Islamist, Wahhabi, obscurantist, really, from an ideological point of view, but very central to the reproduction of capitalism worldwide and to the hegemony of the Americans, was central because they allowed the destruction of another project that was thriving in the region back in the 1950s. And that was the project, not just of decolonization, but it was the project of regional solidarity based on Pan-Arabism, based on secular values, based on an idea that the region could come together. And guess what? They perfectly understood that Palestine wasn't just a national liberation issue, was a developmental issue. Why would the Pan-Arabists put Palestine as a central war to be fought for them in the region? Because they knew that there was not going to be any national liberation without the removal of the Zionist entity in the region. Which, yes, it is a military outpost, but it is more than that. It incarnates literally the religious obscurantism of the West. Why genocide now? Because genocide has to be allowed. It has to be allowed in order for the system to continue its reproduction. And as Corinna was saying, of course, we are in a moment of total crisis. So the more in crisis the system is, the more it will try to oppress the same formations that it has oppressed for many years and decades. Sami, I have no idea how much time I have. I've gone over time already.
I'm not keeping time. Aaron is keeping time, but
I'm gonna wrap up. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. What do I want to conclude with? I want to conclude with some thoughts about, very briefly, why it matters to all of us in the West. It matters because, as I said before, this is coming home. It's gonna come home. There are no options at the moment on the table. The pie, the liberal pie, is diminishing. There is no way to to enter the system unless you are going to support genocide. So this is on many levels, what you are confronted with is that you're not going to find a job. You're not going to be able to actually reproduce yourself as a human being unless you decide to support genocide. At this point, though, we have an option. And the option is to organize, to disrupt this system, to organize, not just individually, but in formations to disrupt the system. Now, when I say organize, I also want to make another point. And with that, I finish, which is the Zionists did not come to Palestine with visas or with treaties. They came to Palestine with guns and they killed people. The state, when it comes after you because you're supporting Palestine, is not coming to you knocking at your door. Oh, please, can I come in? No. It's coming with violence. So we better start understanding that this is a fight that is going to require different strategies and means in order not just to support the Palestinians, but to decide what kind of future you and all of us want. And I want to conclude there, otherwise I'm going to go too long. Sorry for my thoughts.
Fantastic. I find it's hard to capture the stakes historically in the arc of not just what has happened, but what is coming. And I think you managed to do that very well, perfectly. And it's a hard thing to do because it makes me angry. And I and I say that as somebody who grew up in Yemen. And when you talk about the fact that like Jordan intercepted missiles from Iran that were coming to the defense of the people in Gaza, when you talk about normalization with the people in the Gulf, it's something you can feel when I talk to other people from Yemen, other people from the UAE even. It's a level of humiliation that it brings to people in the region is hard. I can't even verbalize it. I've seen people like be brought to tears talking about the fact that the reactionary governments in the region are Zionists, and there's gonna just make one statement, and then I would love to open this up to conversation. I would love to hear you all talk to each other. But the point of this being a litmus test and a preview of the future, I think, is something that we need to really take seriously. The fact that it's still 2 years in, socially unacceptable in polite society to be against a genocide. Why? Like, what is the reason? Like, and maybe that's a good place to start. I think that's something that a lot of people, that I've spoken to who were introduced to Palestine were never, like, did not understand why simply standing up against genocide and equal rights elicited the kind of reaction from the state that it did, right? This is a hugely radicalizing experience for a lot of people who don't understand, who are just getting introduced to the Palestine Solidarity Movement, the movement for Palestinian national liberation. What we've always known, right? That Palestine is forbidden. You cannot be supportive of Palestinian liberation in the West. And knowing that, like, do we see change? Like, do we see in the labor movement, in the student movement, in awareness of what kind of organizing we need to actually be doing? From your perspective, like, has there been movement in that front? And considering the ways that our institutions, our universities, our unions are implicated in the Zionist entity and the Zionist project, what kind of organizing do we need to see, and what kind of organizing has been effective? Yeah, sorry, panelist Q&A. I just sort of went into it. Yeah, especially in the labor front, like, how do, as subjects and people who are participating in our daily life in imperialism, resist imperialism? And that can go, whoever wants to go first. And I encourage also Corinna, Manny, Matteo, please feel free to ask each other questions and type them in the chat as well. I think all of your contributions have been amazing. Go ahead.
I think Manny, did you want to go ahead since you were talking about labor?
I could. Okay, I'll go ahead. Well, first of all, I'd like to say very clearly that the United States and the West, North America and Western Europe primarily, have not in any way supported, as you were pointing out, the struggle for liberation in Palestine, and have not condemned the genocide in any way, and are actually, as Matteo put forward, providing money and material support for the genocide. And that continues, and it's expanding every single day. So, but I would like to say that I believe that anti-imperialism is the answer. I don't like that term, answer. It is really a very important aspect of trying to struggle within our trade unions and within labor for a better world, and for a world that's more just and represents the working class of the world, which is not necessarily based in the United States at all. I do believe in the labor aristocracy to be the case. So did Marx, so did Engels, Lenin, and many others, that there is a labor aristocracy that's benefiting from the spoils of the extraction of wealth from the global South. But on the other hand, I would say that, well, the United States trade unions are not supporting the opposition to genocide. They make weak statements on the national level because I guess they're afraid, as you're pointing out, or maybe they actually have a stake in supporting the Zionist entity as United Auto Workers and the American Federation of Teachers does. But if we were to go to other countries, for instance, let's say China, the All China Federation of Trade Unions, they issued a statement against the genocide in May 2024, which was highly pointed, and they said that this must stop immediately. I don't see any trade union in the West that has done as much as the ACFTU. I think I think a lot of it has to do with their democratic nature from a bottom-up perspective, as well as other countries. So the Organization of African Trade Unions has also come out in opposition to the Zionist genocide. So there are trade unions, but interestingly enough, they come from the third world or global south, countries that have been the victims of imperialism for the last 150 years. So for instance, I mean, certainly that's true in Africa throughout the continent. And in China, that's true for 2 centuries up until 1949. 1.5 centuries up to 1949. And so what's very interesting is that I consider China a developing country, not the equivalent to the United States in any way. I think there's a just completely misunderstanding amongst Westerners that they think that China is the cradle of wealth. In fact, the United States profits from low-wage labor there. So there's a high recognition of exploitation in China, both amongst the labor leadership as well as the rank and file members, exploitation that's going on in the Zionist entity. Also, another aspect of this, what can we do? I don't want to leave you with nothing. I do think the kinds of things that Corinna is doing is very important, and what we're doing in our international committee is very important. But I will say this, that there is this whole notion that has put forward of choke points. And I did a collection with a colleague of mine on the subject of choke points. And there is also a Palestinian labor federation that is seeking the assistance of unions throughout the world. So we're not going to get the national unions to support us, although there may be certain exceptions like the International Longshore Workers Union in the West Coast, highly progressive, comes out of a communist past and so forth, as well as a few others like the American Postal Workers Union. And so we should work with those kinds of unions and build solidarity amongst countries that are anti-imperialist. And so I don't think you could, obviously we all have to oppose the genocide. We all have to support BDS. But if we really want to do something tangible, we need to work with these unions, the unions that support a Palestinian state, and support BDS and oppose the Zionist entity, and third world countries like China, the ACFTU, as well as the countries, the unions in Africa that are affiliated with the World Federation of Trade Unions, which is originated as a communist trade union, and continues to this day. There is a Western Trade Union Federation that has given lip service to this point, the International Association of Trade Unions, but they really haven't said anything in terms of, boycott, divest, and so forth. This is something that comes out of the global South because they understand far more what is going on in Palestine than most Westerners do. I'll just stop there.
Yeah, that was one of the questions from the audience was what labor in the global South is doing, and I think American leftists can sometimes forget the importance and existence of labor in the global South and their ability to organize. So that sort of brings me to another question about South-South solidarity. And as we see a multipolar world rising, the people that have come to the aid of Palestine have been a lot of non-state actors. I mean, we have a poll of Iran as a strong sort of base of intellectual property for weaponry and training and things like this. But yeah, what does that mean that a lot of support for Palestine has been sort of illicit, right? Has been like states that aren't recognized, like enemy states that aren't recognized according to recognized by the UN, considered illegitimate, or parties that are labeled as terrorist organizations. What does that say? What does that say about the world at large? And I guess, yeah, that's a broad question. Again, apologies, I'm going to take questions from the audience next. These are a lot of things that ring in my mind for sure. So, and I have an opportunity to ask people I really admire.
Corinna, do you want to go?
Go ahead,
Or?
Matteo. I'll go after you, Matteo. Go ahead.
No, Corinna, go ahead. It's fine. Okay. Well, I want to start by saying, because you mentioned the word humiliation before Mani's answer, and I think that's very important, because what is happening in Palestine is an attempt to shower all of us with humiliation, to feel like this, to feel powerless, to feel that we cannot do anything. We are going to carbonize 50 people today or 60. They are slaughtering them. They are literally butchering them. This is what they want us to see. And it's live. Hitler, when he was doing what he was doing, actually had the privilege to operate in secrecy. Now we know everything. And nothing is being done. At least that's what they want us to feel, Humiliation is very important for capital. They want to feel us alienated. They want to feel us that we cannot do anything. And in the process, what are you going to experience? What you said before, anger. You have to use the anger. You have to put that anger at work with all the people around you that are feeling the same things and to organize. You have to understand your place in history. We have to understand that the world is definitely interconnected and we need to change the mechanisms through which we are interconnected. This is why Mani rightly pointed out that if we are supporting the Palestinian struggle for national liberation, then we have to support the ironclad protection that the Chinese have developed of their sovereignty. It's interconnected. When you go to the workplace and you just put a little badge of Palestine, and all of a sudden you're going to be called up and say, oh, you cannot show this, or eventually you're going to be fired, as, for example, in the workplace in which I am, not in the country, but I'm referring to the sector, academia, where you see people getting fired because they've supported Palestine. It's not just an ideological question. Of course, it's an ideological question, but ideology relates to the material reproduction of the system. So to bring why national liberation of Palestine is central, because again, you are undermining the system every time you bring a national liberation struggle into the workplace, amongst your friends, amongst your group, when you're supporting Venezuela and the protection of its sovereignty, when you're doing that with Cuba, when you're doing with that in the Sahel, with all these countries, when you're supporting Russia trying to defend itself against NATO. That is something that, again, shows us that we are interconnected in this world. We can see our place into it, but we need the cooperation. We need to understand how these people-to-people exchanges all over the world can bring us to be all mutually prosperous, not just the people, the ruling classes. We want a different world, don't we? We want this genocide to stop. But in order to do that, we have to start seeing the world as interconnected. As much as the students are terrorists now in the US, So is the government of Iran. So it's Ansar Allah in Yemen. Again, everyone who tries to step up to say something, it's going to be framed in a certain way. We are at the receiving point of massive violence. So we need to understand that this huge amount of violence, it's not just coming because of biblical reasons or something like this, because there is at stake the reproduction of a certain system. And what do we want? What kind of future we want to move ahead? What kind of state do we want that mediates the interests of the Zionists, or that mediates the interests of the people and provides them with job, with fruit, with food to eat, and with healthcare? That's where we need to work. And the fight is everywhere. It's literally everywhere. Of course, the labor union is very important as an organization, but it's literally everywhere. In the classroom, in every kind of sector you are. If you just start talking about this, people are going to start feeling, oh, this is too much. Why should we talk about Palestine? We have to talk about Palestine. This is the moment now, because as they're hammering all these people, as they're carbonizing them, we need to react and use the same principles that we want to establish in the future. Sorry, Corinna.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, I totally agree, both with Manny and Matteo. Yeah, I think, the point that you make about why they're targeting the university, for example, and the need to have this, ideological superstructure that, continues to normalize genocide, and it's being contested. I mean, it's really it's the student movement, but beyond that, the labor movement, I think, has been pushed by the student movement, really, in the context of the U.S. in particular. They've really challenged they've challenged the hegemonic discourses, and they are making these connections, and they see, and Manny, you talked about choke points. The university is also a choke point. The university is heavily invested in imperialism and imperialist wars and genocide, all of the arms industries that our university endowments are invested in, our pension funds are invested in. And students are making those connections, and they are making the connections also between fascism, the fascism of the state, the racist police violence they're experiencing has everything to do with imperialist wars and settler colonialism, because it's just it's just a different face of the same beast. And I think now that's been exposed. We can't go back from here. And so everything that the state is doing now, all of the executive orders, the attempts to demonize and criminalize, I think they're going to start most likely trying to equate Palestine solidarity organizing with terrorism. The attacks on Sami Doon really were the canary in the mine, the coal mine. And and people are understandably worried. They're going to could be possibly hit with material support charges, bogus, trumped up charges for what? For opposing genocide? It's crazy, but this is fascism. This is really what it's about, and it's global. As you're saying, Matteo. So, I was in Venezuela and Caracas last summer for the elections, and the attempted coup there was it was funded by, they were getting support from the Zionist entity, together with the U.S. It's the global mercenary force. They're supporting the fascist government in El Salvador. They've supported fascist governments throughout Latin America and the African continent. So I think everything is coming to a head now. It's important. I do think that the trade union movement is certainly stepping up, but I don't think it's fast enough. In other parts of the world, we do see ports being shut down. There was Morocco, and PYM worked, very closely with the Moroccan port workers. There was, I think, in Portugal and Spain and Italy, various European states as well. And I think that's great and that's important. But also it's not fast enough. And ultimately, as we've all said, the material transformations taking place on the level of the world system, I think materially are going to do more than anything else, than anything perhaps that we can do here to transform, to open up space for the national liberation struggle to succeed, and it will. I'm certain it will, and I'm certain the region will be liberated, but. The amount of violence and bloodshed that will happen before then is what's horrific. And here we need an organized left. It needs to be the student movement needs to come together with the labor movement, with the party, and historically that's how fascism has been defeated, with socialism. And I think, we need a general strike, and not, in 5 years from now or whatever, people are talking about 2020, 28 or 3 years from now. We need a general strike ASAP. And it needs to come together with the student movement. And the student movement, people are courageous. They're willing to take risks. People are taking risks that could land them in jail for years. To exercise their solidarity with the Palestinian liberation struggle, and that's something to be uplifted and supported. But we also have to think about the academy as a place of work as well. We're workers too, and the workers need to be there. The saying, "Our students' learning conditions are our working conditions," and vice versa. The faculty and staff need to step up. They need to defend their students who are courageously on the front lines, resisting these institutions that are entangled with settler colonial genocide and imperialist war, and up against the fascist police state. And that, together with the broader labor movement, I think is really what's necessary. And just one last thing about South-South solidarity. I think that's there. That's what's provoking the crisis, and that's why the genocide is necessary, because this multipolar world order is being born, and there is this increasing, de-dollarization. There is the delinking from the capitalist, imperialist, finance and economy, and global supply chains. And I think there is an attempt to really create an alternative structure, and that is moving forward. It's moving forward, and and that's what's provoking this. And I think we have to remember, I always tell my students, whenever you feel you're in the minority here, remember you're not. You're in the global majority. We're part of a global majority. The rest of the world, a big part of the rest of the world. Of course, there are fascists and reactionaries too, but a big part of the rest of the world is with us. And it's important to remember that process is moving forward, and it's inevitable, and U.S. empire will fall. And that gives an opportunity for those of us who are socialists, who are communists in this country, that opens up a space for us to, as Matteo was saying, to push for something different here, where, we're a different mode of production, a different way of, economy that's, based in life affirming needs, and, supporting healthcare and education and housing and transportation, and, and transitioning out of carbon economy. And we could do that. But we can't do that as an imperialist state. And this crisis is provoked by that imperialism and the overextension and the damage and destruction and death that is created. So, now is the time. I think now is an exciting moment. It's a terrifying moment, but it's an exciting moment too.
That was amazing. Thank you all for that. I mean, if you'll allow me to riff on that a little bit. There's this, in terms of South-South solidarity, I think there's something that Americans are learning by watching sort of the amount of sacrifice that is being made in Yemen, for example, where even like across political faction, no matter your position on Sadullah, no matter your you know, it even transcends class lines. You cannot say a bad word about their intervention in Palestine to a Yemeni, like, and their ability to continue to seriously and earnestly continue to choose serious pain and suffering in the name of other people. And that's been, I think, like one of the things about anti-imperialism that makes it revolutionary, and I think like difficult, is it is not about self-interest. At some point, and that's a muscle that needs to be learned, I think. And I think we were talking earlier, Matteo, about the individualism in the West. It's possible. It is solidarity is possible. It's not. We just need to believe that it's possible first, and then organize for it. We have gone quite long. I think, like to my I'm very happy about that personally. I think everybody's contribution, including mine, went over, and I think we've done a lot of really good work here tonight. So I wanna just answer one last question from one of our attendees, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about events that are coming up, and also thank everyone who participated today. So many here have referenced the anti-apartheid movement. There are differences, but also parallels with the anti-Vietnam War movement. What are the lessons from how labor activists pressured organized labor then, or is the situation, has the situation changed too profoundly since the anti-South African apartheid movement and anti-Vietnam War? What has changed, and what can we learn? We'll keep it short, I think, and then whoever feels moved to speak, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I think that was a question that was in the chat. I think it's very important to actually use the Vietnam War as the point of the ending of solidarity with the Global South of any kind, because before the Vietnam War, I mean, until the Vietnam War, there was actually Western support for the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. There was the growth of opposition, even amongst unions and union leaders. Some may have been killed for it, but against the Vietnam War and the end of U.S. Intervention in Vietnam. I think Vietnam is sort of like the end point of the left and unions, that after that took place, Marxists in the West have basically no interest at all in anti-imperialism, with the singular exception of South Africa, as you pointed out earlier. And ironically, South Africa is very supportive. The South African trade unions are very supportive of boycott sanctions, divestment and sanctions. But I think that we have a crisis of Marxism in the West that Gabriel Rockhill has written about extensively, and that I think that many are pro-imperialist. Many professors who call themselves Marxists are actually supporting imperialism in many instances, and basically opposing any project that has been developed, like as we were talking about. Some of you, Matteo and Corinna, were talking about Venezuela, Cuba, and many other countries around the world and regions, that there is no support whatsoever. And I think that The end point was the Vietnam War for all intents and purposes. No interest whatsoever. They believe that socialism is something that is about bettering the human being or comes out of the self and so forth. People like Herbert Marcuse and so forth. I'll just stop there.
Corinna, please. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
I was just going to say, I mean, I do think, I was going to say a lot of people make the comparison to South Africa and that moment, the end of apartheid. And certainly, like we've used it in our union, for example, Manny, when we've tried to pass our BDS resolution or get some kind of divestment resolution through our union, comparing it to 1985, for example, when even the board of trustees, which is made up of real estate moguls and people invested in weapons industries and fascist lawyers and whatnot, and they divested in 1985. So certainly, there are a lot of parallels in terms of the BDS movement. But I also want to say what I think the more apt comparison for me is Algeria. And, we just passed, this is the centenary year anniversary of Frantz Fanon's birthday. And of course, he famously said, Algeria is the bridgehead of Western colonialism in Africa has rapidly become the hornet's nest in which French imperialism has got itself stuck. And that's what I think today about Palestine. I think it's a really it's a struggle that national liberation struggle that brings together so many of our liberation struggles, included here, and ties together so many connects so many dots. And I think that really that this is the beginning of the end. And so the struggles that we saw around Algeria and the South-South solidarity that provoked, and even, of course, the Black Panther Party went to Algeria after the liberation, and that made an important connection here between the Black liberation struggle. And there are similar connections being made today. So I'm hoping for that kind of liberation, honestly, because I think it's liberation on a global scale that we're talking about right now. And that's not to say, we know there are limitations, as Manny said, to South Africa. It was the end of apartheid, but still there's, white economic control, and there hasn't been the kind of land reform that you had, for example, in Zimbabwe. And I don't think that's the model. I think Algeria, and Algeria, of course, still has its struggles and contradictions. But I think at this stage, what's different today is this is the end of U.S. empire. This is the decline of U.S. imperialism. So it's a different moment than even Vietnam. It's a different moment than South Africa. And I think we can finally fulfill that dream of Fanon as well with Algeria.
It's a lovely place. Unless, Matteo, I see. Do you have anything to add before we wrap up? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm sorry.
No. I was beautiful words by Corinna. I was just listening to them right now. I want to say only that another world is possible. When the American people have to sell their blood, their plasma, to pay tuition fees, to pay their rent, that's not democracy. The one thing that the younger generation is materially confronting is that the system is unfair. The system is not democratic. The state is not democratic. It actually doesn't provide. It showers us with humiliation on an everyday level. And this is important to realize, because the moment you see that democracy doesn't exist, the moment you see that you have literally in power a businessman, someone who incarnates capitalism. It could have been anybody else, but he's in this historical moment, he literally incarnates capitalism, okay? and you look at other places in the world, when you start questioning these things, when the doubt enters your mind that your country is not a democracy anymore, then you maybe start looking at different places. And I say this because I'm currently living in China, and I can tell you for sure that the state is mediating the interest, not of the capitalist, but of the people. When the size of the middle class of China is bigger than the entire population of the US, it means that the development of this, that there is development happening, and it's material and it's for the people. Of course, you can't replicate exactly that model, but you can stop that humiliation that you're living on an everyday level, because there are models that are different. There are options on the table. And, you know, of course, we have, you know, it's a beautiful word, the liberals love, agency. We have a capacity to organize structures that protect our own interest. It's, of course, it's a long fight, and you're going to be faced with violence. And the Palestinians know that. But as Corinna was saying, the world is changing. So we have to only understand on which side of history we want to be. We can be part of that transformation in a better, more mutually prosperous place, or we can keep betting on the violence. But I don't think, you know, this is where we want to be. So anyway, I want to thank you, everybody.
A beautiful place to end. Thank you all for being here. I really, I'm going to remember this night for a while. This has been wonderful. So I want to, after thanking Matteo, Corinna, Manny, say what's going on next, and then bid everybody goodbye. This was a panel as part of Nakba Week. Like I said, we have another panel coming up on the 24th at 2 p.m. And I would love to see everybody there. It is going to be in person, but also streamed on Zoom and posted on YouTube. And it is about organizing for Palestine in the logistics sector, in international shipping, with organizers from PYM, from Salam, from it's not Palauda anymore, so I hope that gets changed, but with people working on in New Jersey for to build labor power and power in the community to end the complicity and continued shipping of weapons to Israel. And we have Laleh Khalili, and it's going to be wonderful. I really, really look forward to it. I want to thank Zach. I want to thank Sammy. I want to thank Aaron. I want to thank Andrew Basta. Thank you. Jorge. Thank you very much. A lot of people put a lot of work into this. And I'm sure I'm forgetting other people. I want to then, just sort of end on a couple of things. Join DSA. Join the IC. Something I am very hopeful about, and something Matteo talked about at the end there. It's on Saturday. Sorry, the shipping panel is on Saturday. I always do this, forget the date. Saturday, May 24th at 2 p.m., 6th Street Community Center. Be there. Something about another aspect of internationalism, of anti-imperialism is it's real, it's tangible, and we know that the revolution is already happening. The revolution is here. The revolution has been happening for a long time, and people are fighting and dying for it. And we continue to reproduce a system here that is dying also, and not worth saving at all. It's not worth it. Like, what we could have if we just joined the rest of the world is dignity, and I think that is something we will have to increasingly confront as things as empire declines even more. And I want to end with a quote from Bassel al-Adad, who gave 8 rules for how to conduct yourself as a fighter. And he gave these rules to Palestinian fighters, Palestinian freedom fighters. But the final rule is, he says, finally, every Palestinian, in the broad sense, meaning anyone who sees Palestine as part of their struggle, regardless of their secondary identities, every Palestinian is on the front lines of the battle for Palestine. So careful not to fail in your duty. Free Palestine. Palestine will live forever. And thank you, everyone, for being here.